doesn't help to win if you don't win with your honor intact. That's not winning.
Welcome to The Grit Factor, reimagining grit as part of the whole person in a life that matters. I'm your host, Shannon Huffman-Polson. This season is brought to you by Tiller, the first personal finance service to automate all your daily spending and account balances into spreadsheets, so you can track everything in one place with everything customizable, strict privacy, and no ads. Try Tiller free today at tillerhq.com. Also by the Grit Institute, providing whole leader learning journeys in grit and resilience, purpose and storytelling. Invest in your people for long-term success. Find out more at thegritinstitute.com. I'm thrilled to be talking today to LtGen Reynolds, a 3-star United States Marine Corps Lieutenant General, retired, who most recently developed, led, and managed the Corps' $12 billion global information portfolio, spanning intelligence, IT, networking, cybersecurity, space, and information. Reynolds guides complex global organizations to manage large-scale risk and transform operational information into strategic business intelligence assets. As the most senior woman in the United States Marine Corps for nearly a decade, and only the third woman to achieve her rank, she is recognized for her ability to identify and retain diverse global workforces to deliver innovation and value. LtGen served on the United States Marine Corps Corporate Board with responsibility for strategic oversight of a $50 billion budget and global strategy, capabilities, and missions. She regularly reported to and was accountable to congressional committees on risk, cybersecurity, and strategy. And in addition, she serves on board transformation, cybersecurity, risk, and DEI committees. LtGen founded LE Reynolds Group, a consulting firm, building on her 35 years of success and leadership in the United States Marine Corps. I know you'll enjoy this conversation. General Reynolds, thank you very much for joining the Grit Factor today. It's a real honor to have you here.
Well, thanks for having me, Shannon. And thanks for actually having the Grit Factor. I think it's really important. Appreciate it.
Truly amazing to have you join us to talk about your experiences, which is just an incredible career, incredible wisdom that are garnered over decades and decades of experience. When you first entered the Marine Corps, and I know that there are many others of the Grit Factor that will have had similar experiences in different ways, but the Marine Corps is a whole different thing, and it would have been a very unusual choice, it seems, to make as a woman at the time. So could you tell us just a little bit about how you found yourself interested and where you found the courage to pursue this pretty unconventional career?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I found myself at the Naval Academy. My entry into the Marine Corps, into the service, came from my, just really intense desire to go to the United States Naval Academy. I was fortunate, Shannon, that my family, we're from Baltimore, and just one day when I was a sophomore in high school, my family took a day trip to Annapolis, and once I walked the grounds, I was just really drawn to being, just being there and having an opportunity to go to that school, and what an honor that was. But when I was, what I was told when I went there was, and this was, the first class of women graduated in 1980. And this would have been, 1982 when I showed up at the Naval Academy. And so we still had a long way to go, I think, in fully integrating women at the Naval Academy. But the good gouge that I got was, none of this is personal. None of this discipline that you're going to get is personal, and never let them see you sweat. And so I really thought through that, and I just refused to let the boys make me cry. I just refused. You're not going to see me cry. And so what happened, Shannon, is kind of funny, is their response, the response of the midshipmen that were disciplining me at the time and other women, It's like, oh, okay, Reynolds, you think you're tough. You think you're going to be a Marine. And I'm like, well, okay. I mean, if that's what it means to be a Marine, then I can do that. I put my game face on.
Sure.
But more seriously, I think what I learned there at the academy, I think you're just drawn to the culture of these different services. The Army has a culture, the Air Force has a culture, the Navy has a very strong maritime history culture, and the Marine Corps culture is very, very strong.
Yes.
And I was drawn to, the mission of the Marine Corps. I was drawn to the culture, and I was drawn by the officers that represented the service there. And quite frankly, I don't think I was smart enough to know what I was getting myself into. And that was probably
for all of us, right?
Yeah. I mean, look, it turned out okay, right? But and I have never, I really loved being a Marine. I still love being able to say that I was a Marine. It was wonderful. Wasn't always easy, but it's not supposed to be. So that's how I got into the Marine Corps. So.
Well, I hear from a lot of leaders that sports played a big part in both developing confidence early on as a young person and also potentially in their ability to navigate some of those challenges within the military. What was your experience with that?
Yeah, I mean, so important. I grew up playing soccer and softball and basketball in high school. I played basketball at the Naval Academy. But, Shannon, everything that I needed to know about small unit leadership as a young second lieutenant in the Marine Corps, I learned, on that basketball team at the Naval Academy. I had an amazing coach who, the standard was the standard, and you were going to meet the standard. Your listeners can't see me. I'm 6 foot tall, so I kind of played small forward. My strength was not, dribbling, and, my strength was get the ball when it comes off the rim. So it's this whole idea early on in my career, Shannon, of finding out how and where you best contribute to the team, and then do that very well, do the basics well, learn defense, learn offense, and we don't need sexy. We need you to do the basics well. So, yeah, I don't know what kind of officer I would have been had I not been a team sports kind of person.
Right.
I just relied so much on all of those experiences. Learned to follow my gut in those cases. So really great question, because it's really important. And for your listeners who might have, be high school sports coaches or college coaches, boy, the impact that they're having, whether they know it or not, the impact that they are having on potential young leaders out there is incredible. So.
That's a really good thing to reinforce, both from your own experience as well as understanding the impact that we have on others. And actually, I love how that leads into some things that I know that are really important to you and that you've talked about in the past. But I talk to a lot of clients about being part of a team and what it means to build your own team to support the work that they're doing. So you've talked a little bit about how you started to understand this concept of team. Can you talk to a couple of times during your career where that was particularly important, and maybe where you really had to focus on doing the work to build that team, and what that meant and how you went about it?
Yeah. Well, first off, I think, just as you think about, joining an organization like the United States Marine Corps, it's just one big team, right? And so when you think about it from that perspective, look, our standards in the Marine Corps are pretty high for a reason, and for your listeners who don't really maybe fully understand, the Marine Corps is the smallest of the services. Its job is to be the most ready when the nation is the least ready. We have a mandate for readiness, right? Which is to say that we are forward deployed. We are we call it the nation's 911 force. And when something bad happens around the world, Marines are there to buy decision space, to buy time. That's what we do. And so this whole culture of fitness and readiness and you know, as you come into an organization with that kind of intensity, it can be overwhelming until you kind of breathe deep and say, okay, I don't have to know everything. I got to know my part.
Sure.
I have to do my job well. And my platoon that I have, or my company, my job is to make sure that they know what their part is. And then we're just going to do the basics well. It just, for me, thinking about it from a team approach helps me to not be overwhelmed. Again, going back to, the sports analogy, you don't win games by yourself, right? And it's about, how you best contribute to the team and understanding what everybody else's role is, and it develops kind of this sense of humility as well, right? As you're doing it, because as much as you want people to realize that you're a good teammate, you have to go out and do the work to understand what everybody else is doing and how they can help you, so that worked for me at Echelon, like throughout my career, whether I was part of a team or leading a team, just thinking about it from that perspective, it was always very, very helpful to me.
Well, ma'am, when we spoke before, one of the biggest challenges of your career, it sounds like, was when you shifted from this very team-focused sort of a role that is more typical of what you would do in the Marines, as you've been describing, to something that was a lot different and made more challenging in those differences and in that more individual focus. Can you talk about how you adapted to that? What was difficult about that? And then how you drew on those strengths from what you had learned earlier to be able to apply that to that challenge?
Yeah. So Shannon, so when I was a major, I was very happy. I was out in Camp Pendleton, California, where every good Marine wants to be. And I was a company commander in my, chosen field, which was communications. So I was raised in the Marine Corps as a communications officer. And I get this phone call from headquarters Marine Corps that says, Major Reynolds, you've been selected to go command a recruiting station in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. And I said, you must be mistaken, because I'm here in Camp Pendleton and I have a company and I'm good. And this is exactly where I'm supposed to be in my career. And, and I got the thanks for your contribution to the conversation, but here are your orders. And so I find myself in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, doing recruiting. Now, you have to understand that, again, I mentioned how small the Marine Corps is. We're also very young by design.
Okay.
Recruiting is the lifeblood of the Marine Corps, because at any one time in our past, it might be changing in the future, but in our past, 66% of the Marine Corps is in their first 4-year enlistment.
Wow.
Now you think about that, right? So, most Marines are under the age of 26. It's a very young force. It's again, because it's highly deployable and so forth. So recruiting in that environment is very high stress. It is a no-fail mission for the Marine Corps because we turn over so fast. And up until this point, there had only been 2 other women that were assigned to recruiting duty. And this is 1997. And the Marine Corps began to kind of challenge this notion that only Marines who were in the combat arms professions could lead recruiting, because it was considered peacetime combat. It was like no fail. Anyway, so I find myself in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. It's this big experiment of, women in command of recruiting stations. Will they fail? Will they not fail? A friend of mine and I both went out there at the same time. She went to Florida, I went to Harrisburg. And it was hard. I mean, it's probably the hardest job I've had in the Marine Corps. Maybe it's a close second to commanding Marine Forces Cyber, and we can talk about that later. But
sure.
Here's why it was so hard. I had 44 canvassing recruiters in all of Eastern Pennsylvania, and I had to find a way to communicate my intent. I wanted them to make mission the right way, with a clean conscience, with where we're going to We were going to promise things that we could actually deliver on. We were going to fulfill, the needs of our young folks that wanted to join the Marine Corps. And it was hard because so many Marines, just like I was told to go, they didn't ask to be recruiters.
Sure.
They are not natural salespeople. They're just Marines. And so you got to figure out, okay, here's, Sergeant Smith, and you just got to pat him on the head, and it's all he needs for a week. And this Marine over here, he needs to be incentivized, and this Marine over here, he needs discipline. You just need to kick him in the butt every day. And this Marine, you got to call him. Emotionally, Shannon, it was draining to understand from a leadership perspective what motivated each of those 44 Marines to perform with honor, right? And I'm an introvert. And so I just learned, so much at the end of the, month. You're just absolutely exhausted because, unlike every other mission that we have in the Marine Corps, recruiting is kind of an individual sport. At the end of the day, the numbers say whether you made it or you didn't. And each recruiter at the end of the month, the numbers say whether they made it or not. And so it's very difficult. There's so much to the art of recruiting. And, those of your listeners who do sales will know what I'm talking about. I never wanted to be a salesperson.
Right.
Best product in the world is the United States Marine Corps. There's just no doubt about it. But it's still very, very hard. But the leadership lesson, Shannon, that I learned there, the resilience, the grit, that it took to just keep Marines motivated in a very demanding environment, really were kind of lifetime lessons.
Absolutely.
Lifetime lessons. And so, as a lieutenant colonel, when I was selected to command a battalion that was headed into Fallujah, Iraq, I was able to draw on all of those lessons. How important kneecap to kneecap is in a leader's kind of portfolio of things, because at the end of the day, leadership is a very personal thing.
Sure.
How you are able to inspire people, inspire them to contribute to the team. Everyone's motivated by different things. Recruiting duty for me is one of those examples of where I really thought my career had been derailed. And as it turns out, it was exactly where I needed to be to get me ready for the other hard jobs that were coming my way. And so I often think about that when we think we've just taken kind of a left turn.
Sure.
I would just offer, just dig in, just learn what you can, because you never know when you're going to build on those skills that you learn along the way.
I have to admit, I never thought of or understood recruiting in any way, but certainly not how you've explained it. So thank you for that. That's really helpful to understand.
No one in any service comes into the service to be a recruiter.
Sure.
No one. Right. And so this is one of the reasons why it makes it so difficult. I mean, you believe in the product for sure, or you wouldn't still be in the uniform, but it's just hard. It's hard.
One thing that comes to mind as you're talking about that, and I want to get into the time that you took your battalion to Fallujah as well, but because I think they probably both apply, but there's a lot of discussion about leadership transparency. And I think there's lots of places that transparency is really good. It's incredibly important to be transparent about things like finances and where things are so that people aren't in the dark. But at the same time, it seems to me that when you're doing something like what you're describing there, where you're really having to motivate individuals in completely different ways, and you yourself are learning completely new skills, there's a level of almost translucency that's required, right? I mean, you can't go in there and show that you're scared. You have to go in there with confidence, right? To inspire confidence. Could you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, it's a balance. You have to be confident.
Yes.
But you also can't fake it.
Sure.
Right? Because in my experience, I mean, we have a lot of people that try to fake it. You know, and it's hard, right, Shannon? You've been here. In the military, you change jobs every 2 to 3 years.
Right.
And sometimes you walk into a job where you're in charge. This happened to me, recruiting. I was not a recruiter. So now I show up as a commanding officer of a recruiting station. It's a completely different language. I have to go to sales training. I have to go to all these, but my recruiters know that I don't know. They know that. So I'm not going to fake it. Yeah. What I'm going to say is, I'm going to pull up alongside them and I'm going to say, show me what you do.
Yes.
And show me what you need from me so that you can do that better. My job as a commanding officer is to remove obstacles to production. That's my job.
Yes.
So if I don't understand what the life of a recruiter in the Marine Corps is, then I can't remove those obstacles.
Sure.
High schools that are just very, very difficult to work with, that's my job. But so I think there's kind of this art form when you walk in and you're expected to lead of having confidence that you can learn, being vulnerable enough to ask people, tell me what I need to know. What do you need me to know about this job? And then, just moving fast when you are confident enough to kind of make the decisions that you have to make.
Sure.
I think the other thing that is relevant here, though, Shannon, that I think is, this seems like a blinding flash of the obvious, but the more that leaders can articulate the why.
Yes.
You have to assume that your workforce, they're thinking individuals, they're smart, they want to be part of that team, they want to contribute. So don't tell them what to do without telling them why.
Sure.
And then, I always say it's not just what we accomplished, it's how we accomplished it, because the how matters, yes. Right? The how matters, the footprint that we leave behind, the processes that we leave behind, they matter. And so knowing as a leader when to ask the next question, when to kind of say, hey, this is what I need you to do, but let me give you a little bit of the background so you understand why we're doing this. And then you let them run, right? Sure. You let them run. And they so appreciate that. So many times people are just left in the dark.
Right.
They're just left in the dark. I don't know why I'm here. Shoot, Shannon, look at what the Russian army is dealing with right now. I don't know why I'm here.
Exactly.
I just know it's cold and I'm in this truck. And so I'm going to let the gas run down.
Right.
The heater's staying on until the gas is gone. When you educate your folks to know exactly what you're doing, why you're doing it, why it's important, and then you watch them perform for you, right? Then you just let them go.
Yes.
So,
those are incredibly wise words. And I think that a lot of people are facing these challenges right now where things seem uncertain and things are volatile and nobody's quite certain how it is to lead through these times. And those sound like really sound principles to make those connections to your people, to spend time with them, to ask them those questions, to ask them those follow-up questions. And what I love that you're also saying, and I think this is something that we need to talk more about as a culture, as a business culture, as a military culture, is you got to get the job done. You have to accomplish the mission, but you also need to do that with honor and with integrity. And so how do you inspire that against the challenges of, hey, you also need to individually perform and the numbers are going to show whether or not you've made your numbers at the end of the month? How do you hold those two things in balance if they are ever at odds? By the fact that the environment is so unsteady, so the horizons are unclear, kind of day to day is really up in the air, and that's really causing an incredible amount of stress. So I feel like the wisdom that you just offered with connecting to your people, asking them questions, asking them how it is that you can help them, is a really important thing to return to. And the second part of that I really like that you mentioned, and I think we have to talk about much more as a business culture, as a military culture, as a society today, is balancing those requirements for performance, especially when, as you said, at the end of the month, the numbers say whether or not you made your numbers, right? It's pretty clear. With doing that with honesty and with integrity. And I wonder if you could speak a little bit to how it is that you make that balance, if it's ever at odds.
Yeah. So It isn't a balance. I mean, because it doesn't help to win if you don't win with your honor intact. That's not winning. Um, and it's. I mean, this is what I think, Shannon, as officers, as leaders in uniform or out of uniform, even I think I always felt like my job was to help Marines become better people, right? So none of us are ever finished, right? Our job is to represent the American people, and so we have to represent wherever we go. We have to represent the very best of who we all are as a nation, and so that's work. That's all of us. We hit ethical dilemmas sometimes, and working our way through those things. And the challenge of a duty like recruiting, going back to that, is Marines are working on their own. They're not supervised every day. And so it really, just keeping their schedule, putting in the hours, doing the hard work. There's kind of a, you got to do the work, And so, I think as a leader, you don't want to end up preachy, but you do want to leave them better. That you want them to feel like they're better people because they served with you, right? And so I don't know. I just I think that's really important, I just we talk about it a lot, but how you do that is in the everyday, right? I think that we have a lot of heroes in uniform that are heroes that have given their lives, and they've made decisions to do something very brave, but there are a lot of heroes that make very tough decisions every day as well, and it's all about making people better and doing the ethical right over the easy wrong. Those things are just as important from a leadership perspective, I think.
For sure. How did you remind yourself when things were challenging? And I know you talked about helping your Marines understand why it is that they were doing what they were doing, as well as what the requirements were and what the mission was. So for yourself, when things were challenging, when they maybe felt like these were all new skills, it wasn't where you wanted to be necessarily, you weren't quite sure how it was all going to work, how did you stay connected to purpose? I feel like that's an important thing we talk about a lot. I think we can't talk about it enough, but it is harder to do than it sounds sometimes, especially when things are challenging.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I think at the end of the day, you gotta be able to sleep with yourself. You gotta be able to be proud of the work that you're doing, and you gotta wear the uniform well, and you can't be an imposter.
Sure.
And this whole idea of leading by example, and that's not easy.
Right.
We all have bad days, and sometimes leading by example is telling your folks, look, I messed up yesterday, so I don't know. I mean, you just have to be drawn to, Shannon, one of the things that I would tell young people today coming into the service is you can and should be deliberate about the reputation that you wish to have.
Mm. Yes.
It doesn't just happen. I mean, it can, but it may not be what you really want it to be. And I just think that you can be thoughtful about that as a leader, as somebody who is building a reputation in a profession, whatever it is. How do you want people to think about you? Are you who you think you are? Are you, for me in the Marine Corps, I would tell young people, look, if you should be the Marine Corps that you thought you joined. You should be the leader that you wanted to have.
Sure.
So
I like that.
It's just being thoughtful and deliberate, I think, every day.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and as you came into your role as a recruiter, and I know this was true actually at many, many points, starting with the Naval Academy going forward, you would often be the first woman or the only woman who had been in that role. And I know when we talked earlier, you had talked, and I liked a phrase that you used, that you're fitting in while standing out, and the art and the science of that, which I think comes into play a little bit here in this deliberate application of how it is that you want to develop yourself, how it is that you want to show up, how it is that you want to be perceived and actually work. So I wonder if you could speak a little bit to what that was like for you, and maybe early in your career, but also later in your career, where you're one of the only three-star generals right in the room, and you're the only woman in some of those conversations for nearly a decade.
Mhm. Yeah, as you first come into the Marine Corps, at least in my experience, you earn your reputation. You have to be able to prove, Shannon, that you can hang physically. I mean, it's just, when you walk into an organization that is mostly men, they first want to know, can you hang?
Sure.
Am I going to have to carry your stuff, or are you going to carry your own stuff?
Right.
Are you going to be the last one on the run, or are you going to lead from the front? Like this is how first it's physically, then it's technically, can you do your job?
Sure.
Only after you do those first two things will they begin to listen to any words that you say. Yes. Right. And so just knowing that in my organization was helpful. The longer that you stay in, where your voice begins to matter more, and there is this balance that I learned that I needed to have an ability to stand out when I needed to stand out, to have my voice matter, to say the things that needed to be said, to say the things that perhaps nobody else was ever going to say.
Sure.
While at the same time, fitting into that team, right? So again, never leaving behind this idea of my contribution to the team, but knowing when to have the confidence to say, wait, that's not right.
Right.
Or have you considered this perspective? It didn't take long for me. There's so few, female lieutenant colonels and certainly generals in our Corps, that everywhere I went, I was the unicorn. Sure. You get real used to that. And again, it helps to be 6 foot tall. Sometimes I don't have to say anything. I just move my eyebrows, and that's all I really needed to do. And people would take notice. And, but I think, there's just this fine art of knowing when to be different.
Sure.
At the end of my career, certainly as a general officer, I had perspective that no one else in the room would ever have.
Sure.
That of being a woman, being part of a minority, having a viewpoint that the rest of the team just didn't have. And I think, Shannon, what you learn, there's so many things that just I took on as kind of my responsibility. The longer that I stayed in the Marine Corps, you felt a greater responsibility to make a difference, to make it easier for women coming behind you, for make it easy for other minorities. Because the institution is just built for the majority. It's not malign. It's just how institutions run.
Yes.
And so it takes people to say, wait, if we just tweak this a little bit, we would make it so much better for all of these people over here.
Right.
And sometimes it's just having the art of bringing these things up at the right time, most times, sometimes you have to say it twice, 3 times. Sometimes you have to be more persistent than that. And sometimes you don't win, right, because the institution is the institution. But again, it's just this constant balance of fitting in and standing out and knowing which lever is most effective right now, right? It's not always comfortable.
And what about earlier on? I know we talked about this a little bit earlier as well, but there's especially as a junior officer, maybe even as an early field grade officer, there's Early on in anybody's career, there is a balance and a dance and a development that comes about learning to be comfortable leading in your own skin versus leading like you think you need to lead as you see others around you who are different from you. How did that work for you? And what do you recommend for people who are making
Yeah.
that navigation of that pretty difficult journey?
Yeah, it's hard. Listen, I remember again. I mean, we've already talked about it. You change jobs and change teams every 2 to 3 years, and
Sure.
just when people are comfortable with you and your leadership style, on you go to the next place, and the eyebrows, the eyeballs are on you again, and okay, you got to prove yourself. There's this constant proving of yourself. But I think what I would say to young people coming in, Shannon, is like, just don't fake it.
Yeah.
Just don't fake it. When you're new, people know you're new. You can't hide the fact that you're new. Say, hey, I'm new. I'm ready to learn. Who wants to teach me?
Sure.
Who you are, the things that matter to you as a leader never have to change. Those are the things that you can be confident in. I care about doing things the right way. I care about leaving things better than I found it. I care, these kinds of things, you can own that all day long. But walking into an organization where you don't yet understand the mission, or maybe it's a different language, and for me, it was recruiting, it was acquisition, it was these different jobs that cyber, I commanded as a 2-star, a cyber command that I have. Communications is not cyber. Right.
Sure.
Cyber is, a completely different discipline. And here I am as a 2-star commanding it. You got to get real vulnerable.
Sure. Yeah,
Right.
talk about that a little bit, because cyber is absolutely where so much is happening, and that's a really big deal. How did that happen? How did that move happen? And what was that like? Because you're very senior at that point already,
Yeah.
and you've got to
Yeah.
go in and still be able to be vulnerable. What was that
Yeah.
experience like? And how did you?
So just very quickly jumping to this, we spent a lot of time talking recruiting, and I
Sure.
apologize for that, but the foundations I got from that, my next job was, as a lieutenant colonel, I commanded a communication battalion in the Iraq War. I was in Fallujah. And then I was a colonel. I commanded Camp Leatherneck, which was, in Afghanistan. I had battle space assigned to me. And then from there, I'm selected as a general, Shannon. And my first 3 years as a general, I'm assigned to Parris Island, South Carolina, which is our East Coast recruit training depot. And I also have the Eastern recruiting region. So we combine at the leadership level, we combine recruiting and recruit training.
Okay.
So that's kind of my path through the Marine Corps. And then at about that time, I did a year in policy, and our commandant in the Pentagon, but our commandant at the time, General Dunford, called me and he said, Lori, I need you to get up here to Fort Meade. I want you to command Marine Forces Cyber. Now, it has been, it's been a couple years, even since I had my hands dirty on the network side, right, as a communications officer.
Sure.
But when I got to cyber, boy, that's a whole different. Cyber is not communications.
Right.
We were trying to figure out how to build the teams, the teams that contributed to the cyber mission force. It's a new warfighting domain, Shannon. And so we're trying to figure out how do you even fight in this domain? Where do you get the permissions? Where do you get the authorities? If you think about it in like the early days of aviation, you're an aviator.
Sure.
You think about the early days of aviation. It would be like, okay, we've built a plane. We kind of have people who know how to get the thing off the ground, but we really don't know how to land it yet. So we're building the workforce.
Right.
But what we don't yet really have runways, and we don't have navigation systems. And if we want to use it offensively, we don't have any bombs to drop. That's where we were in cyberspace, right? So that's my best analogy, is to say all of these things were happening all at the same time. We were just building teams.
Right.
And what most people don't understand is that you have to have your own infrastructure to fight from. defensively, you're defending kind of your networks. And so I owned the network, and that was easy enough to understand. But there were just so many big pieces that needed to be fit together, from the doctrine to the training to the, weaponry to the permissions to, there's just so many pieces. Fortunately for me, Shannon, I was able to ask the next question and the next one after that. And sometimes as a leader, it's one of the other things I always tell folks is always ask the next question. Don't leave. Your responsibility to the institution is to get clarity,
Sure.
Right? Always ask the next question that's burning in your gut that you just want to be able to move on. But it goes to how. It goes to not just what are we going to do, but tell me how we're going to do that.
Sure.
Right? How are we going to walk through that? What do you need in order to be able to do that? And what will it look like when we're wildly successful? Right. All of these questions that just build on each other. And I think sometimes people don't like to ask them because they feel like, well, they think I won't trust them if I ask all these questions. No, this is what you do as a leader.
Sure.
You have to dig deep to understand exactly where are the issues that I can get involved in as a leader to make sure that it's easier for you to execute. That's what I spent 3 years doing, Shannon, 3 years. Talk me through this again. What are we doing? Who are our partners? How can I help build partnerships? It was just 3 years of intense learning and putting some rigor and discipline into, who we were in the Marine Corps. What was the Marine Corps? What were we going to do in cyberspace, and kind of putting some form around that. Fascinating, hard.
Wow.
A lot of sleepless nights. But again, as a senior leader, your job is to just figure out, how does it work today, and how do I make it better for tomorrow? And how do I just continue to drive Marines and give them focus, make some order out of the chaos so that we can begin to kind of step by step, make progress. That's what leaders are supposed to do. Sure. And that's what I did.
Amazing.
I tried.
Can we back up a bit to Iraq and Afghanistan? And I know this is jumping around your career, but I know that at the same time, there's some of the same threads that are carrying through each of these experiences, although your requirements may have been very different in each case. What was it? Talk a little bit about how that was different, going from recruiting, which was incredibly challenging, to combat.
Yeah, so I was just, Shannon, just really fortunate. The big milestone really for Marine leaders is to be selected for command as a lieutenant colonel. So as a lieutenant colonel, you've now been in the Marine Corps, for 12, 13 years, maybe. And that big milestone is finding your name on a list that says you have the honor now of commanding a squadron or a battalion. Sure. It's kind of an institutional level board process that, where you just, this is what you stay in to do, is to be able to lead Marines. I was just so fortunate that I was selected to command a communication battalion back in Camp Pendleton. A communication battalion is the largest communication unit that we have inside a Marine Expeditionary Force. A Marine Expeditionary Force is a 3-star led warfighting organization. And my job in 2003, 2004 timeframe, the Marines of the 1st Marine Expeditionary Force, that 3-star, we were going back into Iraq. Okay. So we had done the march up into Baghdad, and most of the Marines had gone home in the fall of 2003. And then we had to go back. And so in February of 2004, Marines from the 1st Marine Expeditionary Force in Camp Pendleton went forward, and my job was to install, operate, and maintain a warfighting network for that commander. And so we were spread out across the Anbar province in Iraq. And so I just, of course, every lesson that I've learned so far about leadership, is now put into practice. Only in, now the stakes are really high because we're not talking about winning and losing the recruiting battle. We're talking about, bringing Marines home alive. And so, there's a lot going on back then. There were a lot of Marines that were deploying, and you just have to begin to kind of rest on everything that you've learned, follow your gut a little bit, ask for help. I had a great, sergeant major and a senior enlisted leaders who were wonderful partners, a very experienced battalion, who had been to Iraq already and just come home, and they were going again. And so it's, building on all of those lessons learned and making sure we don't make mistakes that had been made in the past. And for me, Shannon, the big thing that nobody talked about, but I knew was like, I think I was, the only female battalion commander that had taken Marines into combat like this.
Wow.
And so that there's an extra set of eyes on you. Nobody talked about it. I didn't dwell on it, but you sure don't want to fail. There's a lot of really better reasons to not fail, like, bringing Marines home alive. But I always knew that if anything bad was to happen, then my leadership would be questioned just because, well, it's a woman Marine, it's just the way it is. And I think over time that will change. Right. But in 2004, it's the way it was. And so, so there's an added pressure there. There's a little bit of, there's a burden there. And I think we talked about this the last time we spoke, Shannon. What really bothered me was this sense that my Marines felt it too. Mm. And you sure don't want to hand that burden down to your Marines.
Sure.
But I think they felt it out of loyalty to me that we're not going to, so a lot of lessons learned. I mean, I learned some really crazy lessons on that deployment. Really, I bumped into them. So we took over. I think I may have mentioned this to you earlier. We took over from a unit that had kind of been positioned in the same spot that we were in, and their daily hygiene was not what I would say acceptable. And so we went in, and this whole idea of just pick up the trash, do the basics well. I started to, notice that Marines were just not picking up the trash. I mean, it's blowing around, and like, that's not the way I want to live. And so I'd say, hey, Marines, let's pick up the trash. I would pick up trash, but I couldn't get the Marines to pick up the trash until I said to my officers and my staff NCOs, hey, okay, tomorrow morning we're going to do a police call. Before, I don't want the Marines helping. It's just going to be us. We're going to clean up the camp. I said, man, why are we doing it? Because I'm asking you. I've asked. I'm not going to ask anymore. We're going to clean up the camp. And they said, okay, man. All right, we get it. And it's all it took. In about a week's time, we start doing these morning police calls. It did not take long at all for the Marines to begin to really take real pride in our unit, just because of the way the camp looked. It's kind of the broken windows theory that I watched play out, where if you just take care of the small things, the big things take care of themselves. And it goes back to this whole idea of, you don't have to be sexy with leadership. Keep it simple. Have standards that your Marines can thrive. They thrive, that your people will thrive inside the boundaries that you establish for them. Give them running room. But like, if you go left of this and right of this, I'm going to come down hard on you. But, right. In this case, it was just, we're going to run a clean camp. And what I saw happen was the same pride that they had in the way the camp looked translated to the network that we ran, the way they took care of each other. When they saw people that would walk through our camp and toss, like, they would come together and like, hey man, that's not the way we live here. And the team that came around over something like, that started with just pick up the trash. It was just this really incredible lesson learned for me as a leader.
Sure.
And so I say pick up the trash. It's not about the trash. It's about, what are your standards?
Yes.
You don't have to be a jerk about it. It's not about that. It's not about like, I'm going to come. It's about, this is the way we're going to live.
Right. Right.
Because the how matters.
Yes.
So that was just an incredible lesson for me as a young lieutenant colonel. I built on that, in Afghanistan. Shannon, same thing. Now I'm running a camp. I got 20,000 people as a camp commander. I'm a communications officer. I don't know anything about running a camp. It just was my job. So, and by the way, they assigned me battle space. I had an area of operations around Camp Leatherneck that was assigned to me. It wasn't the Marine Corps saying, "Hey, it's time to assign battle space to a woman." It was just my job.
Right.
Unfortunately, we had gotten to the point in 2010 when nobody thought about it. Not lost on me, by the way, Shannon, that when I came into the Marine Corps in 1986, women couldn't be in combat. Women, even when I was at the basic school, they wouldn't give us live rounds. The women in my platoon, we were in an all-female platoon. Yeah, we when the men were off doing kind of live fire training, we had to go like butta jam, because they didn't give us live rounds. Not because the policy of the land then was that combat exclusion. Women don't go into combat field.
Sure.
So
wow.
So not lost on me that from that time where they wouldn't trust me with live rounds, they actually assigned me battle space in Afghanistan. And so I got to call that progress, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
It's slow sometimes.
You roll with it as it comes.
Yeah.
What I've heard from several other people, and you are a walking example of this as well, is that you have to be ready for when things change, and for when they change to be able to step into that and then to be able to lead. Yeah,
I think, look, my observation of the women that I've served with, they were more than ready. They were kicking doors down, it's just, even in Afghanistan, I mean, we were questioned. I remember there, I had some working dogs that were on my team, and we would use them for bomb sniffing dogs, and I had a young corporal. This was fascinating. I had a young corporal that was, she had a working dog, and she was assigned up in one of the northern forward operating bases at the time, and it's pretty kinetic time. And there was I think it was a CNN reporter, somebody did a story that they were up there and they said, "Hey, here's this woman Marine out here with this dog, and she's going on patrols with the infantry, and she's doing a really great job." Did this really great story about her. And, it didn't take long before, it caught the eye of our higher headquarters. They were like, why do you have these women, out there? Like, come on, man, it's 2010. The old policies don't work anymore.
Right.
And I'm talking to my CG, and I said, "Sir, you have women all over this battlefield. You have truck drivers, you have maintenance specialists, we had female engagement team, gals that were out, doing security missions and intelligence missions. I mean, but there are people back in, the United States that were going, what are these women doing out there?" It's like, come on. Not only are they out here, they're doing a really wonderful job. And I said, "Hey, by the way, sir, I think that working dog is a female too. Should I bring the work?" Right? I mean, I think about it, right? The dog is getting the job done, right? So it's all about talent management. So anyway, I
love that.
You're right. You're right. You got to be ready to step in. You got to sometimes be willing to push the door open when it just makes sense to do so.
Sure. But you're bringing up two things, and actually I'd love to just mention one and then have you speak to the second. But the first one is that it's important to tell these stories, right? It's important to have you telling your story so that people who are not paying attention can start to understand and reframe their understanding of what leadership is and who's been out there doing it for decades already, right? More than decades, really, but certainly to make sure that these stories come to the front, because I don't think as women leaders, we're not conditioned to do that. And certainly as military leaders, we're not conditioned to do that because we're part of a team, right? But these are important stories to tell. And that is important to know that how we tell our stories is important in
Right.
relative to organizations. And I hear organizations all the time talking about wanting diversity, but if you look at their posters on their walls and on their websites, it's all white men, right? And I'm like, well, if you really are looking for diversity, you've got to both demonstrate that you're doing it and that you're making the attempt, but also show that population that you want everybody to come in and contribute their very best efforts, and you need everybody to come in and contribute their best efforts. So thank you for that. And to that end, I know you have some ideas on how is it that we work within these institutions that are constructed really for the majority to redesign them in small and large ways so that everybody does have a chance to come in and give their absolute best to the mission.
Yeah, well, first you have to talk about it differently than we have, I think, in DoD for so long. For so long in my career, Shannon, we talk about diversity, and it's just, your mandatory annual training on, sexual harassment and EEO and these things that are check in the box kinds of training, or it's Women's History Month, or it's African American History Month. It's not about how does diversity contribute to the mission.
Right.
How do we think about building a diverse team that represents the American people wherever we go? And the way that I talk to my folks about it, Shannon, I remember when I was at Parris Island talking to my 24 recruiting station commanders about how important diversity was. These are the recruiters, right? And I said, if you want to go build a house, or you want to go build something, I don't want to be the carpenter that's given a box of hammers.
Right.
I don't want a box of hammers. What I want is every tool that's available to me. I want the whole thing. I want them all. I want the full suite, so that whatever problem I run into, I've got an answer for that.
Yes.
That's diversity, right? That is it. And so why, if we're talking war fighting, would we just want to be, representing, one portion of our society? I think we haven't spoken like that in the past. And Shannon, our history sometimes holds us back. We have a very strong legacy in the Marine Corps in particular. Like we are bound by our history. We stand on the shoulders of the Iwo Jima generation and the Chosin Reservoir and all of these, storied, all of our history is it's what inspires people to join. It's what inspires people to greatness. There's very little minority representation in those stories.
Right.
And so we have to start telling new stories, to your point. Yes. We
Yes.
have to build on the past, and we need to continue to talk about the rest of these stories. Shannon, I think about those 12, Marines and corpsmen that we lost, in Afghanistan in August. And I think about Sergeant Nicole G., who, she's a maintenance Marine. She's part of the Marine Expeditionary Unit. She's standing on that wall with all those other Marines. And, this very, very difficult job of rescuing people that needed to be rescued from Afghanistan. We left it to the lance corporals and the corporals and the sergeants and the captains to figure out. And there's this just iconic picture of Sergeant Nicole G. standing there with an infant, right? And that picture for me, we lost her 2 days later. She's gone. She gave her life. But what the Marine Corps needed her to be that day was just a human with feelings and compassion and bravery. And so, it's going to take all of us to represent all of us.
Yes.
Right. Yes. And yes, on our worst day, we're going to have to be very kinetic and very lethal, and our enemies need to fear us. That doesn't mean that we all have to look the same.
That's right.
So this is not in any way watering down the mission of the United States Marine Corps, the Army, the Navy. Our enemies must fear us, but they should also fear the way that we think.
Yes.
Right. And the power of, what America really represents to the rest of the world. And that's where diversity comes in.
Absolutely.
So that's the way I feel about it. I think when we really start talking about that, some of these other issues that are significant for us,
yes,
the sexual assault, the sexual harassment, and the hazing, and some of these other things that have just lingered, and they're hurting people because we sometimes think that we're protecting the brand. I think, there's this, too much focus on lethality without enough focus on the ethical warrior piece of who we are. The Russian army is very lethal.
Sure.
That's not who we are.
Right.
So anyway, I think if we don't start talking about it like that, if we don't start respecting what we all bring to the fight, I really believe that at the deck plate level, how we treat each other, how we all contribute to the team, that's how you get after some of these kind of nagging but important ills that we just can't seem to kill in the military.
Thank you for that. Well, it goes back to what you said earlier, that the how matters, right? The mission matters and the how matters also.
It does.
Absolutely.
I just one last thought on this, Shannon, and it shouldn't, I probably didn't give it as much time as I should have before I was faced with, okay, I'm taking Marines into combat. But I heard once, when I was a young captain, the ethics of the military profession and the ethics of military leadership. And that is this idea that only really in the military, maybe in some ways the law enforcement profession there's an analogy there, but there are very few other professions like the military where you may be actually authorized to spend the lives of the people that you love.
Yes.
And when you really think about it like that from a leadership perspective, like these are people, I may have to send them into combat. There's a trust there that has to be built. That leaders have to be very, very intentional.
Sure.
And trust is one of these things. I think, as we think about where we are as a country right now, I'm really worried about it. We're 50 some years into the all volunteer force. People vote with their feet. Parents support or not support or will not support their kids going into the service. It's all based on trust between leaders and led, between Congress and the military, between the president as the commander in chief and the military, and this whole idea of trust, because at some point leaders will make a decision that may cost the lives of the very people that they love. And so that's something that I think we all have to continue to work on, to make sure that we never, we never lose that trust. We're always and constantly working for it.
That is incredibly well said. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing your wisdom. Thank you for sharing your stories.
Sure.
There are many people in all different walks of life that will benefit from hearing from you, both on the grit factor and I know in many, many other ways that you'll be out in the world. So I so appreciate what it is that how you have served. Thank you, and how you continue to serve.
Well, thank you, Shannon. It's been nice talking to you, and thanks for what you're doing as well. And thank you for your service.
Absolutely. I look forward to more opportunities to collaborate or to support what you're doing in any way that I can. So
sounds good.
Thanks for listening to The Grit Factor. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a review on your favorite podcast app and share it with a friend. Also, pick up your own copy of The Grit Factor for more candid stories and lessons from leaders in the vanguards of their fields. And invest in yourself and in your team with learning journeys in grit, leadership, purpose, and storytelling at thegritinstitute.com. Thanks for listening. I hope you'll join me for the next episode of The Grit Factor.